Welcome, welcome, welcome to the Make Love Easy podcast. It's good to have you all back. It is my honor, privilege, and profound pleasure to introduce a very powerful teacher, healer, coach who I've had the honor of seeing at least twice. This is the third time this month. And the wisdom and the embodied, like crystallized, just expertise and capacity and love and heart that I have experienced from this man. I was just like, we gotta put you in front of my people. So welcome, Joshua.
Hey, thanks so much, Lewis. I'm really grateful to be here. Yeah, super fun. I loved our conversations, even in the workshops of just the engagement we had. So I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Sweet. Yeah. We might even talk about the conversation late last night after the event.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah,
open to any of it.
yeah, no holds barred here. So tell me your story and who you serve and how and yeah.
Yes, so it's a long story, but I'll give you some of the cliff notes from it. And where I'm at currently is I work with couples, but I primarily work with women. And so I'll kind of start there to go, how is a man working with specifically women is usually a little bit more outside the culture in general. And to kind of show you how I got there around dating and relationships and finding love, but through the nervous system.
Mm.
And so the Cliff Notes, journey of my story is essentially I was the traditional dude that grew up military, sports, athletics, put things in a box and hammer forward, and that worked great until I went through a big emotional loss. That my brother came to see me and said, "Hey, man, I'm shooting heroin. I got to come live with you. I'm going to die." I told him no because I was building a company. And 2 days later, he died of a heroin overdose. And I did what I'd been trained to do. I found out, cried for a minute, put it in a box, flew back, took care of my family, and then came back to work on my company and just kind of put that all in a box. And it worked okay in the box until my company came crashing down, 6 or 8 months later, and came home one day to find my business partner running off with my girlfriend. It was 2008. So everything kind of collapsed at the same time. So I lost my business partner, my girlfriend, and I had to go through bankruptcy. So it was just like all these layers of loss. And then I was really sitting there with like, oh, I chose this over him. And that real question led me on my hero's journey. And I did what any sane man will do. I was like, oh, okay, just get back up and go. Because my definition of emotional resilience at that time, or resilience, was just how quickly can I get back into action. I had no awareness of emotional resilience. It was just like physical resilience, I guess you could call it. And I was like, who's the best in the world? I believed it was Tony Robbins at the time, so I became a peak performance speaker trainer with Tony Robbins, and thought I fixed myself after a couple years of working with Tony and helping everyone else, and decided to serve others. And I kept having people in the grief and loss space that kept coming up. And so I was like, I got the tools. I fixed my grief. I'm going to help you fix your grief. And I failed miserably. And it really woke me up. But I'm like, oh, I thought I had the tools to fix grief. What, maybe I don't know something here. And I started a documentary, and I started interviewing grief and trauma experts to help them fix their grief because I'd fixed mine. And along that journey, I really quickly realized I hadn't processed any of my grief. I just put it in boxes and avoided it. And the interviews gave a really gentle, loving, compassionate approach to learn to be with my grief, and to learn to accept the parts of life I couldn't fix. Because the grief work is really about learning to love the parts you can't fix. Like there is no fix for. And so it brought up like, oh, I thought I fixed it. Most of personal development's like, you're whole, you're whole, you're whole. There's no broken, you're whole. And when it's like, we're broken and whole, it's like, oh, we're heartbroken. We've been heartbroken over and over and over and over again. And there's layers of that can't be fixed. And we've just glassed over it. So when you create the space to go in and love on those parts and be with those parts and feel those parts, it started to bring me back to wholeness. And I was like, wow, I'm feeling so much better. I need to now give this gift. And so I started doing it with men. I spent a decade with men, taking men in the mountains and doing really deep somatic work, doing hands-on, reframing grief and loss as a sense of power instead of a place of weakness, and then using hands-on practices to offload somatically the grief that was stuck in the body, which would typically regress us to like childhood, feeling the deep pain from childhood we haven't processed, and offloading that, and then kind of expanding our worldview, our perception from our wounded child perspective to a more greater perspective and offloading that grief and trauma. And then what started to happen is I started to see men when we started to get in right relationship with ourselves, everything else starts to shift. So finances start to change, relationships start to change, things start to shift because we're no longer recreating these patterns. And so that led to men's rites of passage work. And I spent 5 years doing rites of passage because most of us were missing healthy masculine leadership. And then the culmination of that was the men started bringing their partners to actually do work because they're like, I got all these tools, my partner's not, which is usually kind of flipped. Usually the women are like, hey, I need to give him on the same page. And the men were going, hey, I got all these tools. I want my partner here. And I just started seeing how quickly the women pick up the tools. They're so much more emotionally aware and evolved than men are. And so once the combination of learning the tools of nervous system awareness and practicing regulating themselves, I started to see like 80% of conflict start to reduce. I started to see couples that weren't aligned having really authentic conversations and recognizing they weren't aligned and giving each other space to go find what they needed. And then couples that had been fighting actually came together and started building really deep, meaningful relationships with healthy communication. And then I think the biggest shift to kind of do with the work I'm doing now is I could only get so far with men. Like I worked with men and worked through the father wound and worked through a lot of my work, and men would help me understand women, but I really only had my experiences with women. And so when I started working with women that had done really deep integrative work, it started to shift my actual blueprint. And I'm like, oh, I now have a felt sense of the contrast between women that have done the work and women that haven't done the work. And that changed my awareness. And I started attracting healthy relationships. And that's when I was like, oh, okay. I think it's time that I actually create the space for women to have that same, can I give the gift back? And so
Mm.
that's why more recently I've been working with women and really enjoying the process. I gave you a lot there, but
Oh no,
that's
it's great. It's a great mess to message story. I've heard it enough times, but it's like it's still inspiring. And the piece that stood out to me this time was when me and my former business partner went out to do Make Love Easy, we first thought we were going to serve women.
Hmm.
And we'd ask for, market research and this sort of thing, and women would project stuff on us based on, well, what I was still carrying that I didn't see, which was a felt experience of unsafety. And if I'm not safe inside me, or to the degree that I'm not safe inside me, I'm not actually safe for her, and subconsciously she can feel that. So me attempting to facilitate or guide her. Now it was different for me with business because I could coach women in business, and then it was like, all right, I'm being a version of the divine masculine that you're activating inside of yourself. And there's still projection, but it's like that's what's there. But so I want to acknowledge you, long story short, for you must have cultivated a deep and profound like level and quality of safety inside yourself for women to be so at ease with you doing the work with them.
Yeah, well, I will say this. I had women the whole time wanting to do work. As soon as I started doing deep emotional work, I had women constantly saying, I want to do the work. And at the time, I just thought men do men's work, women do women's work. And so I had a very kind of black and white perspective on it initially. And then as I developed, because I was in it for a decade, the more I would develop it, I realized like similar to what you were saying, like, oh, there's areas I still don't feel comfortable with men. Like there's still men that I was a little uncomfortable. And I was like, I'm going to stay with this until there's no man that I don't feel comfortable navigating, which forced me to develop parts of myself. The men I was typically had a harder time with was what I call hard boys. The men that are more emotional just jump into the emotional work. The men that are a little bit more emotionally free, in touch with their feminine, the men that are more similar to me, I would even say like locked down and like veterans, military, first responders, fire, police, like more of like the traditional masculine architecture you hear in the world that doesn't show emotion. I had a stronger time initially breaking through into that group. And once I did, that's when I started feeling like, okay, and I even have a company called Valor where we train fire, police, and military. So I got so comfortable in that space that I was like, okay, I feel really cool here. And then I did a women's retreat 2 years ago 2 years ago, and it was amazing. It was my favorite retreat. It was fun. It was fluid. We had amazing results, but I still was a little leaky in my energy. I tracked after that. Instead of just jumping in, I was like, I still have some more work to do around my mother wound.
Mm.
And so I took another year after that to do deeper work to really hold the space to be in congruency because I struggle with addiction and recovery. And that was an area of sex addiction. that I struggled with from my past that I have a really compassionate view on it of where it originates from is just a codependency coping mechanism. And it wasn't that I was just leaky in the sense I still hadn't managed to deal with my emotions without a sexual release. And so that area felt a little unsafe in me that I didn't have handled. I wasn't address I had addressed it a bunch of times, but I would fall back when things were really stressful. And I wanted to be in congruency of really practicing my recovery work and owning and feeling in integrity with that before I stepped into the space with women. And then once I felt like, okay, I feel really clean here, then I stepped in and it provided a different, to your point, I had to be safe within myself and in integrity with myself to fully step in a place so I could be in that space without questioning myself. Because the if I'm not in integrity with myself and somebody projects something at me, it's going to trigger the parts that I'm not addressing, and the shadows are going to reflect back. If I'm addressing it, I feel clean and I feel clear, so I can. What it did is it allowed me to lean in sharper, I guess you could say, or like more reflective because I didn't have a shameful area I was hiding. And so I had to kind of face the parts of myself that were hiding to feel completely congruent to step in.
Mm. This is another thing I really appreciate about you from the statistic you threw out about how you've served people, like the subtlety and the precision and awareness of like the impact of your work. That I think a huge blind spot in our industry, coaching, personal development, training, transformation, is an overpendulation in the direction of possibility without seeking to ground into capacity in the moment. Like, where are they at right now? How far can I actually bring them? What can I actually do for them? And then going deeper into yourself, like, what am I actually clean and clear and sharp on? And what am I not? So all the marketers teach us, oh, well, you, your mess becomes your message. And like, so anybody that has the slightest bit of mess and the slightest, bit of training is putting out their shingle. But they might not actually have themselves the capacity to deal with the depth of what might come up in front of them. And what I perceive and experience in you is this like deep awareness and commitment to interrogating your
Mhm.
assumptions about your personal capacity and then digging in and pulling out. And so, yeah, just thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's to me, and I know you're in the coaching industry as well. So for me, that's the difference. There's so many coaches and therapists now, like anybody can put on a hat and learn, go to one workshop and call themselves a coach and get into the world. And that's what's kind of polluted the coaching therapy space, unfortunately. Most people get in because they have trauma and grief and they're trying to fix themselves. And then they want to help others, which I'm not against it. It's just to me the difference between really good therapist coaches from my lens is the ones who are continually doing the work because as you're continually doing the work, you learn a bunch of new tools. You go from like this narrow view of this is the one tool that works to like, oh wow, there's so many tools and they all like cross pollinate. And so it becomes more of like an art of like, okay, where's somebody at? Where do I see them going and how do I help them figure it out? So it changes the narrative to being a more creative, artful process. And I find the more tools we have, the more you're able, the way you keep working is you get things get brought up with clients and you're like, oh, there's an edge there. I need to go deeper into that. So you continually model what you're wanting the clients to do. And so that's to me just my own coaching, because I'm constantly with coaches and therapists and doing my own work, but I've learned to become more precise in what I'm looking for and who I go to based on their skill set of like, what's the tool and the attunement that I need to get this specific result versus just kind of blindly following. Because a lot of coaches are not doing their work behind the scenes, and the ones that aren't sometimes can create more pain
Yep.
because they're not holding you. So they don't know how to hold you, which I know we even talked about a moment of somebody going to feel safe and then not feeling held, right? And so that's another whole piece on it.
Your diplomacy is also deeply appreciated. Yeah, re-traumatization is a thing in this world, and I like the way that you put it. The way that I usually put it is all facilitation is self-facilitation. The only reason someone shows up with an issue that I can see is maybe I'm an octave above it, but it's still in me to some degree, and I get to address it in this version of me on the outside and help them like throw down a rope, and as they climb it, I climb it with them to some degree. So. But okay, so what makes these conversations most entertaining, engaging, inspiring, and like lighting up is sometimes I lower my own shields, take my guard down, and say, all right, well, let me be a guinea pig and just show off
Hmm.
person's skills to my people.
Hmm. Right.
So, my first curiosity is like, is it possible to permanently heal the nervous system? So I'll give you my personal experience. Dad beats mom, mom's, you know, very traumatized. Little Lewis is walking around the house like terrified. Is he gonna try to kill me? And I've got to mastermind my way through life to protect and defend. And then I've got to take care of her, but she's not fully available for my needs. So I become anxious attached. And I still got that with God. We'll get to that. That's an interesting conversation because God plays such a beautiful part in your system and in your distinguishing. But I think until someone heals the nervous system inside themselves enough to be able to be secure attached, their concept of God will be biased and distorted by their inability to receive or perceive that there's a secure person to attach to there. But anyway, so bookmarking that, like what I was left with was all this rage at him, all this terror at life, and all this experience of I can't be sure that I'm safe. I can't be sure that I'm seen. I can't be sure that my needs matter. So I have to develop complicated strategies for either hyperactivating and hey, look at me, hey, look at me, and subtle manipulations. How to Win Friends and Influence People was a great book. I just think my nervous system took it in a direction, social psychology, influence by Robert Cialdini, all of that. And the problem is if you get good at the external stuff or good enough, you may be passable enough in producing results out here that mask the need to go internal. And so what I have found, the only Achilles heel left, like I'll go weeks without trigger, based on my self-care and practices and whatnot. The only Achilles heel is that sometimes there's like a false positive where my nervous system hooks into a potential client or a potential date or whatever, as if they're a secure base and a safe haven for attachment. And then suddenly they're not showing up the way that I would expect or hope for them to. And now I'm like hyperactivated and feeling grief, rage, resentment that is clearly disproportionate to where they're coming from and related to earlier stuff that's been projected into the space because that need has fundamentally not been met. So, like, how do you help people remove and remediate for grief, terror, rage? And is it like a permanent, like there's a tank of grief and rage and it decreases over time to where it's either completely manageable or dissipated altogether? Was that too much or?
No, great. I love how you're phrasing that because I think you give a perfect explanation of even somebody who's done the work for a long time and has a ton of awareness of like, oh, I'm aware of my nervous system. I'm aware of the triggers that activate me. I can see when I get into those states, but like, what do I do about this? Is kind of what I hear you saying is like, okay, I have the awareness, I have the tools, and yet my nervous system still is reactive. So the way I look at it is our grief runs in what they call the center column. So the center column is kind of like from our throat to like I would say like below the belly button, right? So the deep trauma is like below the belly button and it goes all the way up. So if we've been having traumatizing experiences where we haven't felt the grief, the sadness, whatever had happened, instead we moved into coping. And I want to like take a moment to exemplify that. So like even in your example, little boy in the household feels very scared, very unsafe, right? So as children, we need safety. We need to be cared for. We need to be loved. We need to be seen. We need to be adored. So when we don't, that literally is death to a child. So the two primary wounds are inadequacy and abandonment. Sometimes I get into this dialogue. If I track all the way down to the bottom and we keep saying what's beneath it, what's beneath it, what's beneath it, I find we always land at either inadequacy, which I frame as not loved, not good enough, too much, some version of I'm not loved, or I'm going to be left. And they actually fold into each other. If I'm not loved, then I'll be left, or if I'm left, then I won't be loved. So we all have both, but I find there's a primary one that originates as like the primary wound, let's call it, in childhood. And for the child, that is actual death. So from my perspective, in order to not feel death, we become these humans, these identities are born. So if I take it all the way back, there's a child, I'm just free and I'm open and I'm in the world and I get to be loved. And then wound comes in and it forces us from the child into the adolescent because the wound forces our identity to come online to protect us, which are these parts. And these parts come online to override the wound. So if I had a inadequacy wound, then I'm going to be adequate so that I can be loved becomes the identity. Or I'm going to be so successful or XYZ, nobody will ever leave me. Whatever the wound is, that starts to drive our future. And then years later, as adults, now we start to unwind that programming, and the nervous system is kind of frozen. So how I look at it is the underlying wound is almost like what's pulsating, and then that underlying pulsation is what has the nervous system react quickly to protect us and put on the parts. So, in order to unravel, let's call that, first it's daily nervous system work where we're regulating the nervous system, which takes us from these reactive states into a more, it's allowing us to get into the prefrontal cortex, which has compassion, empathy, and rational thinking, where we can see. So the big thing is I can't see when I'm activated. I can see when I'm regulated. If I can start to move from reactive to responsive, I at least get enough time to go, what's going on? Like, what the fuck's going on?
Mhm.
So, but if I'm here, I'm in just in pattern. I do X, Y, Z, and then I usually feel shame because of the way I reacted in a dysregulated state. When I calm down again, I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe I did that. And there's a deep shame, but it was a protective measure that came online to protect me. So if we can start to rewire, instead of shame, I'm in pain when we're in reactive states. And then if I can get regulated to go, okay, what's going on within me? How do I start to feel the pain that's within me? And there's practices. So I have solo practices. I've done them in person where there's hands-on practices, but just anybody listening, a really simple grief practice is literally just, it's a somatic grief practice where you take a pillow and you put a pillow like this and you just rock back and forth, and you could put on a drum beat for 10 minutes, and you'll just start rocking because it brings up the somatic experience of being childlike. And then in this state, you just get into the guttural grief motion. So it might just be like, ah, ah. And I just start to feel whatever's actually in the body and that rocking. And if you allow yourself to go, so creating a safe space to then feel and express whatever's actually in my center column. So what that's doing is it's rocking, and I'm getting into the guttural center column, which is that area I mentioned. And then things will just bubble up and come out. If as long as we let it move, the body knows what to do. So most of the grief practices are really actually simple. The hard part is we've often labeled that as uncomfortable or wrong or loud, or so our ego gets in because it's confused on what we're doing. But if we can just get into practice, it starts to bubble up and it will actually look very childlike. When I first started doing this specific grief practice, I did it for 30 days straight, and I was doing it during a feminine cleanse where I removed all feminine energy from me. And then I just had to try to, what do I do with this energy? And I just would do it every day, and all kinds. I had little temper tantrums. My body would move into like I was literally like a 3-year-old throwing a temper tantrum, and the body would just run the energy until it exhausted out. I had deep emotion that would come. I had anger that would come. Like all this stuff just started removing the layers and layers and layers that were there. So I guess the big picture is there's layers of pain and grief and sadness that comes out, and underneath that is like some deep compassion. So there's, to me, there's two things. There's removing the layers, and then kind of what's left is the nervous system. And the nervous system, I feel like, is like our really good awareness on our needs and boundaries. And then that's how we start to navigate it. So it's like if we haven't done any work, we can't really see it. Once we start to do work and release it, at the bottom of that, you feel what was beneath it. So if in your example, let's say something triggered me and I got reactive and I saw the discharge, and then I went in and felt the grief underneath it. After I feel the grief, it's going to reveal to me what was happening. And then I get language to communicate what I needed. So in that same situation, I might have gone like, oh, this is how I needed to be communicated with, or this is what I needed. How do I communicate my needs in a way, or remove myself from the situation so that I can self-protect self? So what it does is we learn to start giving ourselves the needs that we want, and then we learn to create healthy internal, external boundaries with our environments where we're not outsourcing safety to get our needs met in your, let's say, specific case. But we have to kind of feel the grief to get to what was beneath it, because the story protects us from the grief, from my awareness of it. So think of that's how we survived childhood. Is something didn't work, we created a belief to protect us from that deep grief of I'm going to die literally as a child. So going back into that can feel a little bit scary and messy, but it's real. It's childlike. It's really sweet. It's really loving. It's really gentle. It's just uncomfortable. So to me, it all ends with grief. Like the primary thing of all my work is grief. I don't talk about it as directly anymore because people typically don't understand it or run from it. But the root of it is, I'll say one more piece on this. How do we come into this world? Like we literally start in a womb where all of our needs are taken care of, and we fall in love with this first world where we're floating around in a nice little warm sack. We don't have to eat. We don't have to do anything. And then one day we're thrust out of one world we're in love with into this new world. Then how do we come into this world? Do we come in smiling and like, I'm so happy to be here? Or do we come in grieving? Right. And so for me, if we come into this world grieving, it's the primary tool that we need to learn to move through change of falling in love with one world. And then we grieve that. And then we have to accept the next world. That process is essentially grief. And I know how um, Robert Bly says we should learn to drink grief like a fish drinks water. And I think it's a really good metaphor of grief is to me the fundamental tool that teaches us how to move through change. We just have been taught our whole lives, specifically men, that it's not okay to feel grief. So it becomes challenging. But does that give like, I know I went in a lot of directions, but does that just give some different perspectives around it?
100%. There were so many light bulbs going off, and there's like a constellation of connections arising. I mean, the idea that the experience of that wounding triggered in the modern time, in the moment, is like fear of death. And then also like your system is so elegant, that's why it's easy to come back and be around multiple times because the more I get distinction within it, the more I see how it all fits together and why it works.
Mm,
And yeah, so I could already hear I had this question, but I heard the answer because in German New Medicine, the whole idea I have heard, I'm not a practitioner of this particular modality, but the idea is that if all the weight or intensity of a stored trauma came up in the nervous system at once, it might fry the nervous system. So we can trust the body
mhm,
if we're doing practices like you say, to titrate the dosage so that it does not overwhelm or overload us. And then
mhm.
as you're talking about the rocking back and forth, because what I heard was grief is the root of the rage and the terror. Like it's
Yes.
underneath. And that's brilliant because I can't tell you how many times that's been the most fundamental emotion I see in me. Like I have another podcast on we do graduate level aesthetic appreciation of science fiction. I had a PhD in linguistics with a specialty in artificial intelligence, who we
Mm,
would just talk. And every time we would watch an episode of like Star Trek, there'd be a moment where I would feel compassion for the characters and I would cry. And
mm,
I was always curious about that. Why is there so much tender grief
mm,
there? And my theory started to be that parasocial relationships were a channel for my nervous system to safely,
mm,
without feeling afraid of attaching to someone who might disappear, like begin to feel through the grief. And then as you were talking about the practice itself, I remembered because I've been experimenting with Christianity a lot. It's all the rage in the New Age community now to return to Christ in some way. And then most people edit, airbrush, Photoshop Christ so that they can feel like they're following Christ when it's a whole other conversation. But I was listening to praise and worship music and I found myself rocking back and forth
mm,
and just accessing layers and layers of grief. This was like 2 or 3 months ago. And I felt so cleaned up and cleaned out to the degree that I embraced and allowed that process. And it's also like the rocking back and forth. I think there are certain mystics and Kabbalists or something who do that too,
mhm,
in order to clear the space for God.
mm,
And and also what I heard in your speaking is there's this because it sounds like you've done SLAA and maybe you've even heard of Neil Strauss and the truth and his journey and like I've been haunted by that particular journey for about 10 years because
mm,
my foray into this was through pickup artistry and the seduction community and I had a lot of sex and I was like, well, let me help guys who are lonely, horny, and socially anxious to
mm,
create the love and connection and touch that they desire. But then I realized, oh, if I'm doing that from a felt need to be good enough through validating with an external token, then
mm,
it's fundamentally like ungrounded as a basis for relationship further. And also I mean, the sex might be good, but like it's arguably harming people.
mhm,
And
mhm,
so like when you say resolving the internal external conflation, I hear that doing the nervous system work, prioritizing the nervous system work over and above all the external skilling up and whatnot, it unbiases the nervous system towards a proper proportionate fulfillment of your own needs and organization of your boundaries. And I'd love to hear more on that last piece. And also, if I'm hearing you right in all the previous, like, am I capturing you? Because it sounds like cool.
Yeah. 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 You're tracking. So more on that piece right there that you just said around the nervous system attunement.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Because you say a lot, sorry to interrupt, you say a
yeah.
lot, trust the body and that the body knows. And part of and I hate to do that, like I take the mic back, but just to give
Right.
more
Yeah. Yeah.
sophistication. Um, like for me, so many times the body has been such an unsafe space that frankly has been a threat of violence to people around me because the depth and the intensity of that trigger could come out with like the hyperactive like protest behavior, like no, pay attention to me, like becomes a
Hmm.
and and I'm like, all right, well, I have to regulate that. I instead of feeling it fully, like, yeah, I'll have moments where I feel grief, but like so when you say the body is the sort of the tuning fork, it's like it'll tell you what's what to where to go, like yes or no. Like for me, it's like, well, I don't know that I can trust this thing to give me the right answer because of so much noise on the line, right? I don't think God would put us in the world without a clear pathway to what is in our highest and best good. And I think the body is that. Once we feel fully or clean up enough, what there is that we've taken on or stored in or packed and stacked or pushed down. And so yeah, I mean, how how does one get to the point where you can actually trust your body? And then yeah, what is the unfolding and the unbiasing of the nervous system that takes place in that process?
Yeah,
Think,
it's a great question, and I'm also getting hits on you just as you've been talking, which is great. So a couple things, and I think it's a good kind of track. So specifically anger, because your body goes to fight. It sounds like is where your nervous system goes to is a protective resource. So
yeah.
everybody's a little different. There's fight, flight, freeze, appease, and so it's a little bit like sometimes they call it fawning or different languaging, but essentially there are different coping strategies, and we can also have multiple coping strategies with our body. But for specifically fight, part of what I've seen is as I'm tracking you as well, like anger is the bodyguard to fear and sadness oftentimes. So when we couldn't feel the fear or we couldn't feel the sadness, and also as men, anger is acceptable. When I think of your household that you described, you saw anger modeled very on a regular basis. And so my guess would be the child in you was like, I'm not getting my needs met. If you got angry and rageful, I'm sure you one, you protected your mom from your dad, or two, you protected yourself. So there's it would make total sense of like the anger from dad translated into protect mom, and that anger is kind of the bodyguard to the well of grief underneath it. And then the anger when I've seen anger used, oftentimes it's what allows us to build our businesses. Like, because you use that as anger is action, momentum, it's movement. So the challenge with anger is letting go of the anger. Oftentimes it's like, but this is how I build my whole life, or this is how I build my whole, like I use this as a tool when something doesn't work to go in this direction. So that's where it's a little bit hard in the nervous system is like, can I integrate that piece of me? So I'm not giving this up, the motivator, but can I give out the part that is this force that we're fighting, like the way we describe it when we're using the map of the hero's journey, is in the road of trials, we're fighting the dragon. So in the example of you, the anger is the dragon that you're fighting, which comes from deep-seated from dad, it sounds like, in your family household. Um, the abyss at the bottom of the hero's journey is grief, where we actually feel the grief, we face the grief, we there's a deep grief underneath that of like, Dad, why did you hurt me? Dad, why did you hurt mom? Why didn't you protect me? I needed to protect her. There's like a deep grief at the bottom of that, but it wasn't safe to be vulnerable. It wasn't safe to share any of that. So instead, the anger protects that. So when we're able to feel that layer underneath, the flip side is we come into like compassion, and oftentimes that's the family lineage. So that may be the family lineage. Your dad's anger, which may have been the same with his dad, that's lesser is passed down to you. So that feels like in your lineage, you're the same anger your dad struggled with, which he took out on your mom, is the same anger that you're struggling with because he modeled that in the family dynamic was this is how you process emotion, right? So I guess I want to frame that to say it's not just you that you're working on. You're having to do the work for your whole lineage and the work that your dad couldn't do and created debris. I literally had a guy in my first retreat that had so much rage and anger. He was a high-powered CFO. He ran a company, had hundreds of millions of dollars. He built massive teams. And when we unpacked it, he had this huge rage at his dad for how he treated his mom. Very similar kind of dynamic. So much so that he carried that rage and it was in everything he did. And he had a wife and a child. And in that environment of men's work, we reflected back, you're actually doing the same thing your dad did to your wife and your child. So can you let the anger go so that you can actually change the lineage? And he's like, nope, fuck him. Like there was, it just goes to show how much pain he was carrying underneath he was willing to hold on to the anger no matter what it burned because it was so hard to go, well, my whole identity is based on this. Like, this is how I build companies. This is how I build teams. This is how I do my whole life. I have to let go of this. Who am I without that? So I guess the reason I'm painting that picture is it's really hard because it's literally our identity. Our identity is the strongest force in the human psyche. The need to feel congruent with who we believe ourselves to be is the strongest force in the human psyche. So unwinding that's why doing the work is so hard because you literally have to um and I'll get to where I feel like the nervous system, how it's wired stays how it's wired because every time here's my belief. As we're growing, again, the wound comes in, forces the identity. This is who we are in the world. We're navigating the world. Anytime we're going to grow, there's a deconstruction of the identity, a dissolving of who we think we need to be so we can become the next version of who we are. So every time we grow, we're going to go back through the wound, which to me is the contraction, expanding, contraction, expanding. So getting really aware of the nervous system, what it does is it puts us into conscious awareness of those contractions. And initially, when we start, we're seeing the world and something's triggering us. And usually we're blaming the world. But the more we start to go, okay, I got triggered, pause. I can see that I'm triggered if I'm doing nervous system work and I'm regulating. I'm not in reactive. I'm seeing the reactions and going, oh, I just ordered a box of pizza, a bottle of wine, and I'm obsessively masturbating. Okay, something's going on with my nervous system. I need to pause, get regulated, and go in and actually feel what's going on for my little boy. If I can learn those tools to start to feel the grief, feel the sadness, start to offload it, we can start to offload what's beneath the nervous system's trying to protect, which in parts work, it's like the disowned child, the disowned parts of us that these parts came in to protect. So as we start to feel but let's say if I had to do a visual,
Yeah.
if like, here's the true self. And as a child, here's the true self. And when the wound happens on top of this, all these parts come online to protect the child from life. These parts are typically running the show in adults is what's immaturity. It's like our immature parts are running the show. And so they're trying to protect us from what our wounds are. So if we can regulate enough to go, I see you part, I love you. What's beneath this? What's beneath this? And get really compassionate with what's beneath it. So in yours, oh, I see you anger. What's beneath that? What's my little boy so scared about that this anger is coming in to protect? We usually punish the anger. Like, oh, I'm so shameful. And when we punish it, it grips stronger when we're gonna be really loving and like, oh, I see you. You're coming in to protect me. What's beneath that? And get really curious and really loving. There's usually deep grief beneath that. And so when we can feel that deep grief beneath it, the parts start to lessen or blend, where they're kind of blending back. The true self starts to emerge more, where we don't need the parts to protect us because we've got us more. Meaning, if I said it a different way, if I have an open wound and I haven't addressed the wound, every time it gets touched, I'm going to be reactive. But if I can go in and be with the wound and clean out the wound and tend to the wound, I'm not, and somebody brushes up against it, I've tended to the wound. So there's not this reaction. So the more we go in and feel the grief and feel the grief and feel the pain and learn these tools, which there can be a well of it, what it does is it kind of clears out that emotional capacity in the center column. Our nervous system is still contracting, reacting, but we start to remove away from stories of like, this happened in my world and this happened. And we more just start to observe the contractions like, oh, I'm in a contracted nervous system. I'm going to go do my practice to move through because I'm in a growth season. Something is having me, forcing me to grow. The only way to grow is to go back through my identity, which means I'm going to go back through the wound and I'm going to dissolve my current identity to become the next version of myself. So it moves away from continually looking at the world and we go more somatic into the body, just like the sun's coming up and the sun's coming down. When it goes down, or actually, this metaphor is a little better. When it snows, to just put into action. Imagine when it snows, we're running around going, why did it snow? And we're looking for a reason. And we're like, this is the reason it snowed. So we're frantically running around looking for the reason. And then we find the reason and then it stops snowing. And we're like, that was the reason. So we've been looking in our environment of something that's a natural pulse of the universe of like snowing and then it's sunny, snowing and it's sunny out of our control. And we move into a new space of going like, oh, I look outside, it snows. I put on a jacket, I put on boots, I grab a shovel and I shovel the driveway and my day is going to be a little slower. And I don't know how long this could be. It could be a day, a week, a month, but at some point the sun's going to come out and it's going to move again. If we can start to look at these nervous system tools of regulation, contraction, expansion like that, it gives us so much sovereignty because we stop reacting to the world around us and we start having this sovereignty of like, oh, I'm in a contraction phase, which means I'm about to grow. So how do I be really loving and nurturing and gentling with this pathway back through the identity, through the wound to back up again? And so it's just another, it's how I look at the wounding process, why I believe that in the nervous system serves us. If we're under threat, if you're in nature and a bear comes at you, you're going to get activated to protect you. So we can't fully unlock the nervous system where it just doesn't react because we wouldn't actually be safe. So we still need the nervous system to react for us. What we're doing is just having the self-awareness to track our previous traumas and release as much as we can. And some I find we actually, once you release the trauma, doesn't have a reaction. Other times there's residue and we learn this is actually what I need. So it's kind of like, it's almost like as people are crafting this, I'll give you an example. I have a number of past betrayals from women, and that specifically happened under the influence. So, what I've learned from me is if I'm dating somebody and they're under the influence, my nervous system tends to get reactive because it triggers past trauma from previous events. What I've learned from my nervous system to feel safe is I need either really good communication or like there's certain things I've learned that I need and reassurance I need if I'm not in that environment and somebody else is for my nervous system to feel safe. So instead of just saying, well, I have to work on this, it's me saying, oh, this is now how I'm imprinted or patterned. And I can be really compassionate with myself. And not everybody's going to be a good fit for me, but this is how my nervous system is wired. And if you want to be with me, I just need really good communication around this. You could still go do what you're going to do, but I need to have really good communication for safety in my nervous system. So we learn which things that doesn't go away and which things do. And the things that don't is where we learn to get really good communicating our needs and boundaries. And that's where I find the more other people who are doing the work, you learn to kind of meet each other and okay, how's your nervous system wired? How's my nervous system wired? And where do we fit? And can we be really loving with each other's nervous system?
Mm.
I know the Gottman Institute says the primary determinant for healthy relationships is the ability to be compassionate with each other's nervous systems. And it would make sense. To me, it's the primary thing. If you have alignment, like big picture, hey, our values are aligned in God or how we spend money and if we want a family and where we want to live, like those big things, and we have chemistry on the compatibilities, that's the primary determinant if relationships work is can we love each other's nervous system? Right. So when you get in front of a partner, you're like, oh, some are super touchy. Like, oh my gosh, all these things are triggering. I have a buddy, his wife doesn't like to drive on highways because they're too triggering. Like she has a lot of different layers of like, this is how our nervous system's wired. And he's like, instead of getting triggered on her nervous system, he's like, ah, this is my wife. This is what she comes with. This is how her nervous system works. And I'm choosing her. I'm not trying to change her to make me feel better. I'm learning to go, can I love her enough and accept the parts of her of how her nervous system's wired, and be loving and gentle with that, right? And so I think that's the more aware we get, the more communicative we are, and we're not trying to make other people like in that example, if she was making other people wrong for how they're driving versus owning, oh, my nervous system is really activated on highways based on my past trauma. I like to take side roads. And this is what it feels like to be with me. If you're going to be with me, we're not going to take highways. We're going to take side roads and lovingly expressing that is a very different way to navigate than blaming the world versus owning and being really tender with selves. So does that kind of put it into practice of the conversation?
100%. It brings it into the impersonal, or the interpersonal more precisely, in such an elegant way. I mean, like, you're naturalizing, normalizing compassion for the unique texture that won't disappear, even no matter what amount of work someone does on
Mhm,
their nervous system to offload
mhm,
whatever's there. And not all healing is for all people at all times. Someone might just reasonably say, well, I choose to allow this thing that I have about the freeway to be there and I don't have to fix this. I don't have to spend my whole life. I can just allow it as it's like a slight bias or a preference. I
mhm.
have one mentor, he says all preferences are programming. And I'm like, okay, but it's all right to leave some of that. I mean, without any of that, what would we be? And
Well, yeah.
then yeah.
Well, yeah, like to your point, you may learn there's certain subtleties around communication that you need. And if there's certain communications done a certain way, it doesn't work. So that may be a part that even if you do a lot of, you may not have the same emotional reaction, but the reason you get better is you learn to get preemptive about going, oh, I've learned these are things that are really tender for me. So if I'm going to relate, these are things that are really important to me and learning to communicate those up front without worrying about changing them. Just like, oh, I've just learned how to like, here's how to navigate my nervous system to find me in love. And I've learned to get really good at communicating that. So if you want to come meet me over here in my boundaries, then this is how this works to meet me. And the right partner is going to be like, of course, because I have my own stuff to come meet me in my nervous system. So you're like, you're more gentle with each other because you recognize you both have landmines to meet each other. And so there's a compassion and an actual appreciation that somebody can articulate or communicate it because you have to do the same thing. So I find the better you get at that, you get more compassionate and appreciative of everyone who knows their nervous system as well, right? Which kind of sets up there's something in me broken that I need to fix versus like, oh, I have this deep well of pain that I've felt a lot of pain and felt a lot of pain, and yet there's still more pain. And I find when we communicate this way, it doesn't take me down the pain route where my nervous system feels unsafe. It actually takes me down to feel seen, loved, appreciated, cared for. And so we just get better at those boundaries, which keep us safe.
Yeah, that there's brilliance there because like it becomes a hello cat. That's fun.
Yeah.
It becomes a paint color. Like
Hmm.
your texture, your navigating and dancing with the subtleties of your own nervous system. It's like, all right, because some people out there they say, well, I can't be in a relationship because I need to work on myself. And like that's as if the self was a problem to be solved and that there's a mark and a gold engraved invitation from God that you'll get the moment you pass the finish line. It's like, no, if you can see me, I've still got work to do. If I like I'm here for a reason, at least in the dharmic soul level, and then at the nervous system level, it's a fairly quantitative and obvious process. So like what I see, I've been out of a relationship for a year and a half, and it's like being a first string NFL player who got benched after an injury at the Super Bowl. It's like, no, I mean, I've done all this training. Like that's clearly what I'm for. And what I'm also hearing that's really compassionate and nourishing in what you're saying is that, it's not a wait until I fix me. It's a how can I train you to relate to me and join me in walking on the path and honor that I'm at this spot on the path and I don't have to be perfect yet. Now, I mean, you might have some more subtlety to add to that distinction. Like there's certain ranges of work that need to get done that make you either an active danger or there's like the harm done by being in relationship is stronger than the benefits gleaned. And I also know that relational trauma, there's certain things you can only heal in connection with others. So could you speak to that? Like where is the line between like, hey, it's ethical and okay so long as I equip them with sufficient knowledge of where I'm at and what I actually need and make sort of uh, like distinguishing my patterns based requests and invitations versus like there are so many. I heard several people at the event last night. They mentioned in the things they were talking about, oh yeah, I was in a situationship. And I was like, was like, that's our world right now. It's like people don't know how to distinguish their needs. They haven't calibrated to taking care of them, so they're getting them taken care of in a sideways manner with people who aren't like an appropriate person to partner with them in collaboration, co-creation, reciprocation. And then they find themselves hungry, needy, sad, disappointed, experiencing all the great pains of a breakup and not the benefits of a full-on relationship. So I know I gave you a lot. Just dance with whatever you hear.
Yeah, so and I just started to go down that last track of situationship. What were we talking about right before that? It was more around
How do you know, like, because it's clearly not the right
ah
answer that wait until you've fixed yourself. And,
ah
and you give a bridge with like educating your potential partner on like, hey, join me here, and this is where I'm at, and I'm moving in a direction. But like, clearly there must be some people who like it would be unethical given the depth or intensity of what they carry to invite someone into a relationship versus, yeah.
yeah, so I'm a big advocate of being able to at least do a masculine or feminine cleanse first. So for me, a masculine or feminine cleanse is how hooked am I on the other sex, as an example, right? Or how hooked am I on relationship? So if I can't take 30, 60, 90 days to be with myself without filling the bucket at some level of validation, of some sort of need from that, there's that kind of shows me my work to do if I want to be in sovereign relating. So many people go from person to person to person and just fill the space and don't know how to be in the space. So for me, the filling the empty ghost is probably the biggest thing I see in the dating world of like people trying to fill the empty ghost with each other. And then when something happens, as soon as they're uncomfortable, they're going to somebody else to fill the space. So like being able to be in your own space without another person there, to me, builds resilience. That's when you're like, okay, that's when you go to God, because that's when you start to go like, how do I navigate through this? I'm feeling like when I did my 6 month feminine cleanse, it was really difficult. And I had no idea how driven I was by women. Like I thought I was self-sufficient, independent, all these things. And then when I did a 6 month feminine cleanse, I'm like, oh, I'm needy. Like I didn't even see that. I'm like, I had layers and layers and layers to clear. I had like the women I had been talking to because I was playing around and exploring, which I had never done. And I was like, I had to clear that layer. Then there was like this whole layer of women that I'd been dialoguing with that I didn't realize I had all these little open connections with that I had to like, it took me 3 layers to close down the amount of energy I was like surfing in unconsciously. Like I thought it was just who I was talking to. And then I was like, oh, this is an open loop. This is an open loop. I closed those down. And then when I closed down all the layers, I even did mine pretty strict of like not no flirting. So when I'd walk into a place instead of flirting with the barista or something like that, nope, just like thank you for the coffee, walk away, like remove myself from the feminine. And then I started finding I go to the gym, I'd see a woman, I start to move in that direction to work out. I'm in the store, I see it like, and I was like, my whole world unconsciously has been driven by this, that I'm not led by purpose or God. I'm led by the feminine to fill some empty ghost within me that I need to learn to be with. So for me, learning to be with that empty ghost is can I block the exits of where I'm trying to fill the void? And then can I practice doing the grief work and the tools to feel my pain, to be with my little boy who's, because to me, the little boy is like, I want your love and attention. And we're like, shut up. I'm going to go get it over here. And it's like, I'm sad. And we're like, shut up. I'm going to go get over here. And it's like, so that's kind of how I experience it is our little boy is constantly, or a little girl, if a woman's listening, is constantly like, I'm scared. What's happening? I'm alone. I'm this. And we're like, shut up. And then we're filling it with something else to not feel what the little boy's telling us. So when we block it all, and we can just keep tuning in. It's hard. It's uncomfortable. It's messy. It feels uncomfortable because they're feelings we haven't felt since childhood oftentimes. And so we're learning to make that a practice. But once we do, at first it's uncomfortable. And then we're like, oh, I feel better. And so instead of the thing that I was trying to like, the empty ghost was the feeling I was avoiding to fill the space so I didn't have to feel it. When I start to feel it, it brings me back into connection with self. I'm like, oh, okay, I feel better now. And so then that becomes the emotional tools, just like going to the gym is hard at first. These are the emotional tools. Oh, I'm feeling something. Let me go in and feel it. Once we learn to do it enough, we feel so good after. It becomes the new standard of tools that we use to feel when something comes up. And then when we feel, that teaches us our needs, our boundaries, our communication. And so for me, I believe everybody should go through that journey to be, if they're, sometimes you end up in a relationship early and then you're working through it through the relationship. But if you haven't, that would be a good practice to see. And what I find with men and women is you become magnetic through that. So there's something that happens when you're actually containing your energy and it's not leaking all over the place, but you're keeping it contained where energy actually comes towards you. So if you're a man, women start to show up in your space. If you're a woman and it literally comes towards you. So if you're doing the masculine or feminine cleanse, now it just becomes discernment of what's coming towards me. Can I communicate and now start to work through, hey, are we in alignment? Are we compatible? And what are our actual needs? And then when we're communicating that, not putting a mask on. Because what a lot of people do is go, oh, this person, I find them so attractive. I really want them. And then we hide parts of self or put on a mask early on. The practice becomes, can I just keep revealing what my truth is? And are we still in alignment? Are we still in alignment? Are we still in alignment? And so if we're actually practicing that, it removes most of the problems that come up. So, like as an example, um, if I'm putting on a mask, then I'm going to build resentment later for the mask that I put on, and it's going to come out sideways. So if I don't put on the mask in the first place, it's a lot more vulnerable because I have the potential to be rejected. I have the potential, but if I remove, I got me. So where I'm just seeing, are we actually in alignment? Because I want to be met underneath my mask, like for my true self. And I want to meet them in their true self. And do we actually align? And if we don't, it doesn't mean I'm wrong or they're wrong because we both need to be met. So it kind of removes the perspective of getting like, and I studied some of the pickup artists for stuff for a while too, so I get that background. For me, it feels very much like I'm using a pattern or I'm using specifics to get something. It doesn't feel very much like what am I contributing. So I track the same like how do I then who do I now I get the person, we get emotionally bonded. Now what? I don't like I put on a mask and it's not actually who I am. It's a front. And so it removes it's almost like getting the thing and then being caught in this really messy dynamic. So, but if we can practice doing that, what it does is it removes us from saying, here's my needs and you need to meet them. It more is like a revealing, who are you? Who am I? And then if like, let me try to give a specific example. I had a woman I started talking to, this was a while ago, and she started saying, she said, hey, in a really loving way, I just want to let you know, for me, what feels best in partnership is to talk every day. Like I really need that for my nervous system. So that was an example of her revealing to me and noticing I wasn't doing that. I wasn't calling her every day. And then she noticed the trigger, regulated, felt, oh, I'm needing this. Instead of making me wrong for not doing it, which a lot of people do, she revealed to me, oh, here's what I need. I've learned I need this to be safe in relationship as an invitation for me to step into. When I heard it, I said, hey, thank you so much for letting me know what your nervous system needs. Let me take a little bit of time to check in and see if I can do it. So it wasn't a like, oh, well, in the past, I'd have been like, I got it. And I would have overrode my nervous system and put on a mask to meet her need, which would have created resentment later. Instead, I learned, okay, I'm hearing request. Let me take a little moment and actually check in to see if that's true for me. When I checked in, I was like, I've done so much work at night to regulate my nervous system. I can't do that again, where I jump on a phone call at night. I get activated. Now I can't sleep. And now my next day is going to be off. So I'm like, I can't do the night, but I could do if it's any time of day. I could check in for 20 minutes during lunch or in the morning. Or so my question was like, hey, does it have to be at night or could it be any time in the day? And it was like, oh, any time of the day. Okay, great. I can do that. But I just wanted to give an example of like what it's like to check in with. She's communicating her needs, doesn't mean I need to meet them. And if not, I could have been like, hey, you really deserve to have that need met. And I'm realizing, like, if she might have said, oh, I need it at night. And that would have been her honoring her truth. And my truth would have been like, I really need to take care of my nervous system at night. And I'm not going to be able to meet that. And I really want you to find that. So it kind of gives practice to go, she's not rejected if I couldn't meet that. It just means she's boldly owning her needs and somebody could definitely meet that. I'm just not the guy. So I think that's how we start to relate is we're checking in with our needs. If we're operating from truth, there's no resentment later. We're both communicating in really loving ways, unattached if somebody can actually meet them. So I guess I want to give that frame because we're always going to be works in progress, but the more authentic we can be, it allows us to find much sooner if we're in alignment or not. And if we do that, there's less resentment. So there's kind of like the less blowback, big confronting things are usually because we've masked something and then we build resentment and then we take it out on them. But we're the ones who masked who we were. So if we can start it authentically, it's just really hard to practice that. It's like at first it's so scary. It feels so vulnerable, communicating needs, communicating boldly what you need, and doing it in loving ways. That's what takes a little while to practice. And at first, you maybe feel rejected because if we've been operating from the wound, we're going to attract people initially that I remember when I first started practicing this and communicating what I needed, I got rejected. And I was like, that's what I worried about. And then I was like, as I kept just going, well, this is my truth. I'm going to trust. Then I started to find alignment over time. But initially, because of where I was attracting from, my fear would come true because I was attracting from a false premise. It wasn't from my authentic nature. Does that give a little bit more context around that?
100%. With that last piece, we do the wrong thing so long that the right thing initially feels wrong.
Mhm.
And it takes practice to get to the other side where we're now doing the right thing long enough till the wrong thing feels the way that it should. Um,
So true. So true.
do you have a book? Like
I don't. I need to create one because I have clear frameworks.
you
Yeah.
100% do. Like it's just the depth and subtlety of articulation from the overlap and the wounding you mentioned earlier to the implication of the art that comes about and crystallizes as somebody has multiple modalities. I was seeing like a honeycomb of different varieties of angle of or vectors of approach to any particular issue or like challenge in the nervous system. And anyway, there's so much. I wanted to say my earlier constraint, the class, it didn't work out, so I've got time to freewheel for another 20 minutes at least. And you
Cool.
let me know whenever you're full.
Yeah, that works. I got 20 minutes.
Cool. So I think the most impactful thing for our listeners is going to be the answer to this question. Um, you talk about God a lot, and it was really resonant and nourishing for me because I've had so many direct, specific experiences of like divine provision through manifestation, synchronicity, serendipity, and I've come to aspire to and orient towards what I would call secure attachment with God. Now, I feel it's difficult to complete that journey without having securely attached within myself and cleaned up and cleared out, which to me then looks like, going to the Remember experience in Costa Rica and opening my heart and entering this like bubble or pocket where a new channel is forged and intuition is clear and I can trust and feel and capital L love flows in and I'm like, there's something more than the physical and God loves me. And then I'll get triggered into that old rage or anger. And then there's a bifurcation where now I'm either in another part or something. And that part, because I studied philosophy professionally, starts to reframe and reinterpret all of what I experienced that other people would simply accept as divine, mystical, spiritual experience, confirming the existence of a being outside oneself that has a wealth of love and honoring and support that's flowing to us. So I've done the masculine cleanse 30, 60, 90 days. I don't know if I was as fastidious as you with combing through like am I flirting? Am I looking? Right? Am I subtly? And so that's an interesting and provocative potential challenge for our listeners, our viewers. But I think the most important thing to do if somebody goes that way is like to then fill that space with not just the work internally, but as one's doing the work internally of offloading and titrating the dosage, moving through it, but like filling it with God, you say God, your community, nature. I think God is best. So my perspective is love doesn't come from people. It comes through people when you tune to it. Just
Mhm.
like abuse doesn't come from people, it comes through people when you tune to it, which is it could be dangerous in the wrong hands, like for somebody to speak that. That could be an excuse for somebody to lord over and, oh, well, you're just manifesting abuse through me. Well, yeah, that can be true, and my behavior is still something I'm responsible for. And at the same time, no matter what human you're with, they've got wounding, and they're not going to show up perfectly as a ATM meeting your needs. Like, so instead of hooking into them as the primary secure base or safe haven, like hook into God, and then this person is a nice bonus, which in my system, we call it co-empowerment, where it's not codependently thinking that I'm the bitch of how they're showing up. Like, no, instead, I get what I need, and I always know I'll get that. So I'm curious how that, or whatever model or version of that cashes out for you, where you're able to go to God and you're able to feel or experience. Because I've got several badass coaches who've got like 8-figure businesses. They're dear friends of mine, and they go through Christ to God. And they've got a direct experience that is so palpable, visceral, reliable, and real that I'm like, I want what they have, but I don't know that I trust the dogma that they believe in to get there. And there are moments where I feel it, but then my mind, which is this big, beefy construct to protect against dad beating mom, right, shoots in and is like, nope, nope, I'm not gonna give. So maybe you have a model that could help not just a skeptic slash want to believe Fox Mulder kind of X-Files guy like me, but other people who are listening, like to find that path and craft it so they're no longer like a dog returning to its vomit looking for women to fulfill a need that is actually internal. And this last way of phrasing or framing this is one of these two coaches. He basically says that a lot of our perceived unmet sexual and romantic needs are really just unmet spiritual and emotional needs. And if we get those met first, then those latter two will be able to fulfill more easily through the magnetism you're talking about, or more effectively through a person in whom love never leaves, like a longer term, deeper, more nourishing relationship. So anyway, I've free-willed enough. How do you stay connected to God? What does that look like for you? What does that mean to you?
Yeah, I mean, I've always been, I had a lot of death early on, and I started going to different churches and went to Christian, Catholic, Roman Catholic, Mormon. I went to all of them, and I would like come in, and then I was a blank slate because I had no religion, and they'd accept it, and then I had all these questions, and then I would kind of rebel, and then I would leave. So I had this example of like all these churches, and I've always been very God-based, but it was more like early on, I was more, I'd say, New Age, and just looked at like what can I see as recurring themes as in the macro and the micro is how I what I took as truth. So if I could find something in the big picture and the small picture, which is to me nature. So I kind of went to nature and the body, I guess, is a the body, we still don't even know how it starts. And we're so complex. Like we've been studying it to understand. We don't even know how the heart starts. We know when it starts, but we don't know how it starts. So, like something so complex as the body that we start as this little cell and we form into multiple cells. And this somehow comes into you and I are very different, which look very different, that have vocal, like the complexity of the eye, the complex, like anything you break down in the body is so far complex of how we function to live life that to me that's kind of the vastness that I've always put my faith in is like what's the consciousness of that of nature of make like if you anything you break down in our reality that is of nature you'll find recurring themes of macro micro, right? Like what they see in the eye is the same in the human cell or what there's these recurring themes. So I looked at that as my primary faith that I'd say I've always kind of had, especially when I had a lot of grief. It's what I was serving, but it was very indirect previously. It was very much like this consciousness that I was serving. That was the consciousness behind everything. Even when I did a lot of plant medicine, a lot of different medicines, and I would always end up in the same place as kind of like this empty matter, vibrating matter in the universe looking at itself. And we created this whole thing to like make a journey of it. But it's like this literally like we're just empty cells and matter vibrating is kind of where I'd gone to in the deepest thrones of nature, if you will, which is essentially what our cells are, just space. We're all this space.
Our
But
molecules and our atoms too, yeah.
yeah, so but what helped me with that is, I mean, that's how I did all the grief work. That's how I got into all the work, is I was constantly asking, like, how can I serve? Like I looked at myself as God's warrior. How do you want me to serve? If I can't figure it out, because I'd gone down the entrepreneur path and kept failing, I'm like, if this isn't working for me, like how can I serve? And I remember I'll do two different pieces to tie this in. I remember before I got into grief work, I had a moment where I'd worked 7 years on a company. We sold it for 20 million, but it was a stock deal, not a cash deal, which means I got nothing. After the previous thing I told you about, like I'd had multiple things of startups that had just ended up with nothing, and years kept going by. And I remember I had this day that I like was so frustrated. I put up a map and I was like, what am I actually going to remember at the end of my life? And I started writing down memories. And I was like, I don't remember these long. I was working 15-hour days, weekends, like not no time to sleep, just like work, work, work. I was like, I don't remember. That's all one memory blurred in together. I was like, I remember memories with other people. I remember moments when I surprised people with like, that's all these memories I'm remembering. I'm like, I'm not doing that with most of my life. I'm collecting, working, and it's not equating to something. So I'm like, okay, I'm missing the target. And then next I said, like, what was I given? What was my natural gift? And I was like, I came in kind of optimistic. I didn't develop that. I came in with that. Like God gave me that, or source gave me that. And so I said, okay, if I actually had no fear, like no fear, what would I do? And it was very clear. It was like, I'd take that gift I was given and I'd put it in the darkest place. So it was like, oh, because there'd be no fear about money. There'd be no fear. Like, there'd be no fear. I don't have to build a business. I would just take what I was given and try to bring a little bit of levity. And so that's what, like, oh, do I actually have the courage now to take what I was given? And that's to me what grief and death was. Can I be in the grief and death space and take that light and create a little bit of levity in the darkest moments people will have? And so I spent 15 years in it, and it's guided me in different directions, but I've literally been following, how do you want me to serve? And the irony is on multiple, this is back when I did plant medicine. I don't do it anymore, but on multiple ceremonies, the strongest experience I had was of Jesus. And I come from no background. I don't even know the story. I'm just now learning the story. But I would get, like, I remember the strongest one I had was literally I was asking, how do I step into this? I'm scared. Like, I'm scared to step into grief work. I don't know the business model. I don't know. I feel like I should give this. Like, I'm scared to just make this my purpose. And I remember it like took me down this journey of like showing, like, how could you question the plants and the trees and like all this stuff that I don't have any control over that's actually here? Like, how could you question your body? And then it took me to the story of Jesus, where I could literally feel the love of this man who was just trusting so deeply. Like, whatever you want, I trust. And I could feel the love and the trust. And I was bawling for like an hour because I was like, oh man, I'm so scared to trust. I'm so scared to have faith. I'm so scared to like, and it showed this whole kind of journey that he went on, and even up through the crucifixion. And I could feel this whole journey, just the immense faith and trust. And it was like, can you just trust that I have a plan and that I'm using you for my plan? And so that's what encouraged me to step in full time to doing the work that I did. And it's been kind of my guiding post. So this last year is when I finally was like, all right, Jesus has come to me a bunch of times. I've never really gone to him. It's time that I go to him. And so the last year I've been building my own relationship. And what I'll tell you is this: I don't still fully subscribe to like religion necessarily. So I'm not like, I'll go to churches, but it's more to be in the worship music and to feel my connection and to have, learn about Jesus, if you will. But I really like Jesus as an access point because he's so compassionate. He's so loving. And when I feel him, it's very nurturing. It's very much like even like I could just feel he's titration for me is like, oh, just keep coming, just keep taking. Like, it's very like compassionate, non-judgmental, very loving, and it's an access point to God. Whereas God was so like here for a while. Like, when I was always sitting there trying to feel God, it was all over the place. This is a little bit more pointed. So I'm finding, for me personally, a daily prayer practice, a daily place of having a connection with Christ is bringing me closer to God, but it's a more focused point. And so I'll share that run as much my own personal journey is what I'm doing and how I'm making peace with that. But I still haven't had like some crazy revelation unless we talk about those ceremonies years ago. Since I've started this last year, I haven't had any big one. I just keep practicing daily and developing a relationship. What I'll say about it from the whole nother sense is codependency is what we're most stuck in. So most of us are stuck in a codependent state, meaning we've made the person our sense of love, right? We've removed some deeper connection with God, source, higher, any type of higher power, and we've made the person our sense of love. And so what happens in relationships is there's the source of love is what throws our system off and why we're so activated, regulated. It's like oxygen. So if that's oxygen, then what I do or say is there's so much pressure to try to get that love that I'm going to abandon self to put a mask on to try to get the love because I'm scared to not get it. So if I can move the person out of the way and I can establish some sort of a connection with the higher power, whatever that looks like for anyone, it's hard initially because, like you're saying, it's like I can't see anything. Is like, what is this thing? To me, it's not even a being, it's an energy. I'll say it one more way. I'll say it a different way. If I look at my background in the New Age world, if I just look at it from an energetic perspective, I used to go to Burning Man. I went for 19 years. I ran a camp. So 80,000 people coming to this place with good intentions creates this magic of like synchronicities and this, it's like, it's a really special place, but it's 80,000 people gifting things with the energy of gifting. And it creates this energetic where all this magic happens. So if I just think about it like this, whether or not Jesus existed, it's probably the Bible's read more than anything else. If he's one of the men that people from all over the world are praying to, if we just look at the energetic, what is that energy holding? So it's when my brother died, I did ceremonies for 15 years keeping his love alive. I would do ceremonies, I would write letters, like I would do grief forgiveness ceremonies where I put ashes in people's hands. Like I kept his love alive. It was a really strong energy. So if I did that just with my brother, what's billions of people keeping this energy of Jesus alive to tap into, of prayer and love and hope. So even if to me it's not true, if there's an energetic field where billions of people for thousands of years have been praying to this energetic field of grace, love, compassion, then tapping into that, I'm tapping into the collective field. So for me, whether it's true or not, energetically, that feels true for me, is like, oh, I'm tapping into this collective field and I can feel a resonance from that. And it's moving me away from codependence. If I can learn to be in the space, back to what we said earlier, how do we learn to be in the space? So all 12-step programs are the same thing. It's basically God. Like first step one is I can't do it on my own. So there's a surrender, like I can't do it. The second step is like, oh, I place God. Can I believe in God and faith? And faith is what gets people through the addiction programs. So all the 12 step programs are based on faith. And so for me, I just kind of see that lens. So even if I don't believe any of it, can I just practice it? And can I hear enough stories and then start to find my way through it? And what I'll say for me is this, and the last thing is, um, when I find I'm using this as my hierarchy, God, I live in more integrity. The people I'm attracted to are in more integrity. What starts to become attractive to is who's also following God. And I had a woman that stayed with me for a couple weeks. It wasn't romantic, but she was deeply God-based, and we prayed every night and every morning. And I'd never felt better in my entire life of having God be the central theme, not whatever our stuff is and worshiping self and money and all this other stuff, but actually worshiping a greater power and like praying. Like I had never felt better in my life of just having this energetic between us, even though it was a friend, it just brought so much aliveness into my life. And so I think that's the life I'm creating going forward, is like, if you put God first and you're both serving God, I'm going to attract a partner that values God first. We're going to pray together. We're going to put that above us. And if we're both serving something greater, it removes our egos, our self from getting in the way. Like it's just a different way of living. And I know the research shows couples that pray together, there's like a 3% divorce rate. So it's like, so anyways, hopefully that gave you a little bit of, but I think it's each person's journey. But if you're struggling and you're listening to this, what could it look like for you, right? It doesn't have to look like Jesus. It doesn't have to look like church. It could look like nature. It could look like new age. It could look like spirit, source, God, universe. There's so many ways, but finding something outside of us to serve removes us from putting something else, money, a partner, whatever we're worshiping is gonna, I find, hollows me out unless it's God.
Damn, that was amazing.
Went a bunch of directions, but
That was the most brilliant. I mean, I had a sense that if we went there, it would be some of the most brilliant stuff. And I mean, that last statistic, and then like there's the ego, our sense of identity, which you quoted earlier as like the strongest force in the psyche. Um, our ego is not our identity, though we often confuse ourselves for it. It is an instrument for the expression of love, grace, God, dharma, truth, whatever. And this whole couples that pray together, stay together, orient towards, a higher perspective, towards divinity. It keeps the ego from calcifying, from like turning into the thing that's assigning the things to pursue, the idols, so to speak, with the arrogance of assuming we know what to value. And then we find ourselves like Robin Williams or whoever else, these famous people who idolized specific things on the basis of their ego. Like then they realize that was bankrupt.
Mhm.
And then, of course, a relationship, if it's built on like, oh, she's amazing, let me pedestalize her, and then she turns out to be just another human doing her work at best, hopefully. And then, it's two TVs talking to each other or two people leading each other into different angles of hell. And yeah, there's just so much. So the orientation towards God keeps the ego in a fluid state, keeps the heart open as a movement because we're movements, not moments. We're processes, not things. We're rivers, not rocks. And so there's a whole vastness of resilience, like true resilience, agility in the face of the mystery of life, and like existential capacity that comes from that. You just breathe such new and interesting life into the concept of God and Christ. I mean, like
Mm,
C.S. Lewis famously said, he was like, when I came back to Christianity, it was kicking and screaming, and that's been my experience over the past several years. It's like
mm,
there's something there. I don't want to look. I want to keep, eating, drinking, being merry, doing my whole new age freedom,
mhm,
thing. And anyway, just thank you so much for that. And I've got so many other questions for the green room.
mhm,
But my last question here that I think for everybody is, especially for like coaches, healers, teachers, which there's a lot of people in my audience who are really committed to doing the personal development work. Yeah, I was wondering what that was. I was like, his shadow is showing up. Um,
creepy, man.
yeah, 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 as it does. So like there's a fastidious commitment I hold that I share with you, I think, to like deep congruency of being. Like if I say that I'm safe and loving, I am that internally, and I'm doing my damnedest to do the work to clean myself up fully so I can show up that way for my client, whose responsibility it should not be to confront dysfunction in me. They may occasionally need to do that because I'm still human, and I've slipped off the rails of being love, capital L. And so for me, I'll tell you how I'm dealing with it, and I'm curious just peer to peer what your thoughts on this would be. Is there's still that rage, there's still that terror to some degree in me that I'm titrating the dosage of. And in my men's group that I lead, I've told them, hey, our pain can be used as fuel, to quote Raul Velazquez of his version of the King's Code. I know there's a different one here in Austin, and the whole idea being that the Zen Buddhist master sometimes he allows the energy of anger to come up and then to move through him, but it's not like an aggressive, attacking, judgmental, like trying to harm the other person. It's like a in Zen Buddhist monasteries, they do sesshin where people are meditating for 12 hours. And so some of them give the lead monk permission to walk around with the stick of compassion. And this stick, when he sees that they're falling asleep at 4 a.m. after 16 hours of standing or whatever, hits them and says, Katsu, to wake them up. So I tell my men, I'm like, all right, there's rage in here. And it may come out at an inappropriate time. And I invite you to read it and receive it as love. So that's like a buffer because ideally there wouldn't even be like an expression of rage necessarily, but as someone who can't just close up shop and turn off my livelihood, right? How would you recommend maintaining congruency of being with a commitment to being love, knowing that there's still stuff in there and there's still stuff to do? Does that make sense?
Yeah, so I'd say there's a difference between rage and anger. And so the rage oftentimes is like a form of regression, right? And so the form of regression of rage feels like that's what's palpable. Anger is very different than rage. And
Oh,
so getting to the place of being anger is just an emotion I'm having. The difference of anger being directed at someone is very different than me being in my anger. So the rage is when we lose all conscious control of all of it, right? So the rage is like where it just burns everything up because there's rage. So one, I would say like, what can I do to offload some of the deeper rage that feels uncontrollable? And then what can I do, which may be daily anger practices of like maybe there's a low, maybe the anger's been building and it's unaddressed, and then it comes out at rage because the tank's full and I haven't had a place to put it. So even like a daily anger practice where I'm continually taking the fire out when it's smaller and it doesn't allow it to get bigger, then I could be with my anger, but I can be expressing how I'm feeling less what some like less taking it out on someone else. Because for me, that's the direction. If I'm feeling it, it's one thing if it's like I'm feeling anger and I'm going to acknowledge the anger I'm feeling about the situation. It's another if I'm torching you. So if I have a place to direct it and offload it, it's continually getting it out of my body of just releasing the different anger that's there. And then finding practices to interrupt the pattern. So in as an example, saying, hey, um, I may do a pot like a CPR interrupt. I might say, hey, when I track, but it's really hard to do when you're at rage, like because you've lost conscious control. But as soon as I start to get to here, how can I track signals that I'm getting closer to this and have a practice where I build a built-in pause where I can remove myself from the situation, get regulated, and then come back and express it when I'm in a different state. So it's if I have to break connection to regulate versus burn the connection would be the example of like, can I break it versus burn it? So building in a pause to go, oh, I'm starting to come. Hey, I have to interrupt you. I got to be right back. I've got to use the restroom. I'll come back. Like finding a way to interrupt and build a pause in where when you feel it as like a 3 or 4 before it gets to an 8 or 9, because you can't address it at an 8 or 9, you can address it at a 3 or 4. So to me, that would be the part to work on is how can I work on catching the signal sooner when it's a little fire before it becomes a bigger fire? And how do I do practices to either get regulated, get it out of my body much sooner, and then readdress situations later so that I don't let it get to an 8 or 9? That's how I would start to mitigate the anger of just tracking it. I've had women do the same thing or men of like a freeze pattern, noticing when a freeze pattern comes in. Just to give another example, I had a high powered executive that for him, his trigger was incompetency. And so when somebody was incompetent, he would go right to like totally destroying somebody. And he's like, I was right. And it was destroying his culture in his company and his team because he was taking undue emotion out on employees that were like, you just took my head off. Now I'm scared. Now I don't want to work for you. Like it's destroying relationships. So he just built in a pause when he would notice the symptoms. He'd go, another call coming in. Let me call you back. So that was his built-in pause when he noticed the trigger of incompetency. And then he would take as much time as he needed to then come back so he could have a dialogue, but do it in a really grounded, emotionally regulated way without taking off people's heads, right? So it's like catching, that's why the CPR can come in is like, how do I use the tool in a situation when I need it? And it repeatedly happens. I have to implement it before I get to the point of loss of control.
That is brilliant.
It
And
works. Yeah.
I mean, for those listening, I know I'm asking sophisticated questions from a facilitator perspective, but map it onto yourselves. I mean, the simple way of dealing with fight, flight, freeze at an extreme level that you just telegraphed is the CPR, and going all the way back to the 4-6 breathing. If somebody's doing that, then they'll be able to activate conscious awareness and notice it before the train gets out of the
Yeah.
station, and then, put in some sort of a clever buffer so that I'm getting another call. You can go deal with, re-regulate, and then I mean, ideally, eventually there's enough offloading to where that intensity level of the trigger never occurs anymore, or occurs only seldomly. But in the meantime, there's this stopgap measure that works of the CPR and the breathing and the re-regulated practice. So that's
Yeah,
brilliant.
so I don't think I broke it down on this one. I did in a workshop, but CPR for those listening, C is just conscious awareness. Like, oh, I'm tracking. I have awareness that there's a pattern happening here. It could be tracking like a numbing behavior, like I mentioned earlier, like, oh, porn, alcohol, food, like some things you don't do. It could be a process addiction. It could be an emotional reaction, like a shutdown, a freeze, or an anger response. But it's conscious awareness. For me, it's the gauges of the truck. My gauges are actually warning signal just popped up is the conscious awareness. The P is building a pause. And so the pause is what we were talking through is like if you track your patterns and you find repetitive patterns, you can actually pre-build in a pause when you're regulated to then memorize and then use in those moments when you start to notice the warning signal coming up. And then the R is regulate. And I talked about 5 ways to regulate your nervous system, but the primary way is 4-6 breathing, where you're breathing in for a count of 4 through the nose, and then you're breathing out through the mouth through a count of 6. And you're doing that for 6 minutes. If you're doing that twice a day, every day, your conscious awareness gets more and more and more and more because you're in the front of the brain when you get regulated, you're in the back of the brain when you're under high stress. Most of us live in so much high stress that we're constantly dysregulated. And so I look at it like you're starting your day with a quarter tank of gas. And if you go regulate, you just filled up to a half a tank. So if you're regulating twice a day, you're continually having more tank and the gas to go. And then you can read the gauges, conscious awareness, because you have more awareness of what's actually happening because you're building that muscle to be in the front of your front of your brain where you're rationally thinking and choosing to respond versus just hijacked all day. So That's just kind of putting together what we were talking about.
Amazing. Yeah, for me, you were talking about this guy, right? Who let me take another call, who had what we would call a discernment,
Mhm,
noticing what works or doesn't work about the performance of his employees, but it was collapsed with his own trigger reaction, potentially judgment. And I get shivers when I realize this as you were talking, that judgment is a defense mechanism. The
mhm,
aggressiveness, the pokey, pointed sharpness of it, it's like back the fuck off. And
mhm,
when those two are entangled, people cannot and will not hear or receive the discernment because they have been personally attacked rather than the behavior been distinguished that
mhm,
it doesn't work. And that was a big problem for me with certain clients is I didn't see it in the past that my discernment, which was righteous, useful, helpful, and true, was collapsed with a judgment based on a personal reaction to a perceived lack of safety or lack of being seen or heard on the part of the other person. And so this is just brilliant. Um, I guess my last question is, how do people find more of you? I mean, do you still work with men or is it primarily women? Because I mean, I'm sure our men can recommend some people for you, but yeah, where can we get more?
Yeah, on one-on-one, I still work with men, women, and couples doing one-on-one coaching work. And then the programs I have are primarily for women now, but I still have my K4. K4 Men is our old rites of passage curriculum, which is like what we had a 16-week curriculum. And then with women, I have my Decode the Masculine, which is just biweekly calls and community around understanding men. I do with the business partner Stefanos. I have a masculine cleanse, which I put women through an actual cleanse. And then I have a Sovereign Woman program, which is a 3 month program where we actually deep dive the emotional regulation, moving through codependency, and actually really learning and understanding the differences about men. And you can find me at either joshuamichaelwenner.com on Instagram or Joshua Wenner, WENNER.com is my website.
I now am going to start dream building for a Christmas gift for my next partner. Oh man, thank you. It's been such a beautiful conversation. I'm really honored,
Likewise.
deeply love and appreciate you and what you do and
Hmm.
who you are. And yeah, to all those who've been just hanging out with us, thank you for receiving the gift of this. Please feel free to like, share, subscribe, comment below, share this with your friends, your family. This is great stuff.
Thanks so much for having me on. It's been a pleasure, Lewis.
You're so welcome. All right, y'all, go make love easy.